So as we had mentioned earlier yesterday, that there are 3 different types of lymphocytes, and remember, lymphocytes means white blood cells, and again, I'm going to say it again, natural killer cells, T cells, and B cells. So now we're going to move on to a different category, and that has to do with the different mechanisms of our immune system. So we're going to talk about basically the two mechanisms of immunity in general. So again, there's a lot of categories in this topic, and I'm hoping as we do these little tiny lectures plus your reading plus the movies plus everything, it'll make more sense. And one of my plans by the time we get to taking our test, because that's the first time you'll take a test on this, is that I have a big poster board that I have. I'm going to actually draw it out, even though it's in the videos, so that I can point at it and talk about it that way. That's my plan, and I think that will be very helpful as well. But this is a very intelligent class. I feel that, and not if this is difficult for you doesn't mean you're not intelligent. This is not difficult for most students. This is a very difficult topic in general. Like I said, this was one of the hardest things for me when I was in nursing school to kind of grasp, because there's so many different categories. So with that said, if you're not completely clenching onto it, especially not this week because of pharm, I know that a lot of you have been consumed with that. Before you do take your test, like I said, as part of the what's that thing called that I give you before the test, the helper sheet that tells you what to study, I do plan on doing just a quick short 10-minute kind of diagram, if you will, and I will write things out and kind of do arrows and things like that. So okay, so now we're moving away from everything else that we're talking about, and now we're talking about the mechanisms of immunity. As we just said, there are 2 mechanisms of immunity. Okay, so these are, now we're moving on to different categories. We have a cell-mediated immunity, and then we also have humoral immunity. And if you were to draw this out as I'm talking, or I think this on page 280 or 281 or something like that in your book, it's definitely one of the first few pages. It's going to also explain this, where basically when you have a cell-mediated immunity, that's talking about your T cells. And we know what that means now, because we just talked about that. We know we have 3 types of lymphocytes, right? We talked about that. We know that we have natural killer cells that are non-specific, and they just kind of go out and start the process. And we know that we also have T cells and B cells, and those are all part of lymphocytes, which are white blood cells. So I'm already making that connection. Okay, so I know that one type of my immunity is cell-mediated, and it involves the T cells. Okay, and I know T cells are white blood cells. Got it. And then my other one is humoral immunity, which involves my B cells. And that makes sense too, because we've talked about B cells, because now we know lymphocytes, we have 3 types: natural, which are non-specific, and then we have specific, which are T and B. Okay, all right, I'm starting to see a connection here. So 2 types of my mechanisms of immunity in order to help my immune system do what it needs to do to hopefully help fight off pathogens and antigens and foreign things that basically get into my body that are not supposed to, are going to be these types of mechanisms. So cell-mediated, which are T, and humoral, which are B. So just to be clear, cell-mediated equals T cells, humoral immunity equals B cells. But just as a little bit of a side note, T cells are involved in that process as well, but they're more helpers, not the big honchos, if you will. It's more the B cell. So as far as memorizing, cell-mediated is T cells, humoral is B cells, and then T cells help the B cells out. I always think of T cells as kind of like the stronger. I don't know why they're like the stronger ones. As you can see in the picture that I have shown in the what I'm sharing with you guys, is it says the little B cells over here, I found them, and that's the T cell telling the B cell. So see how it's kind of helping him out. And then B cell, oh God, which antibody should I use? I've never seen this one before. And then kind of funny, whatever, the pathogen or antigen saying, you narc, I thought we were friends. So I thought that was a nice kind of depiction of what's going on and what often goes on inside of the body. So, okay, continuing on. just making sure I'm not on mute because that's what happened yesterday and that kind of is looking like it did yesterday. So just give me 1 second, please. This is recording. It's not asking me if I want to unmute. I really hope that it is hearing me so I don't have to redo it. Okay, let's hope not. Okay, so moving along. So let's start now. Now that we know our 2 different types of mechanisms of immunity, and let's talk a little bit about the T cells. And we're doing an overview of this topic right now. And we're going to get more into it as well when we talk about HIV because they obviously, this is very closely related. And then tomorrow I will post the video basically on allergic reactions because that's pretty more familiar with us than maybe immunity is. Okay, so with our cell mediated, as I said, cell mediated equals our T cells. So when we have a T cell, there's certain types of T cells. So T cells are going to respond to certain types of antigens. Some examples in your book gives, I think they said, I know fungus for sure, and viruses are having to do with our T cells. And they do something very specific, and just remember, again, associating the words, I think right now is the most important part. So when you have a T cell response to something, when a T cell needs to be involved because that's what's going to be able to be the most effective to get rid of the antibody or the antigen, that's going to mainly have to do with and I want you to remember this word. So cytotoxic, and it spells CYTO and then toxic. So cytotoxic T cells, which basically are going to attack any cells that might not be considered normal. So they might be altered in a way of an autoimmune disorder. That could, like with HIV, for example, we talk a lot about T cells, right? Like, oh, your T levels and your T4 and this and that has a lot to do with potentially your body attacking itself. So that's one way that T cells may respond. So cytotoxic T cells would be that type of cell that would attack altered cells. And then you have your helper T cells, and your helper T cells, they are mainly what is making it to where you are creating memory T cells. And that's really, really important. And we talked about memory a lot in our original lecture with everyone together, which will basically retain and remember that pathogen or antigen that got into your body. So in the future, if it comes back in, then it's going to be able to see it and attack. I know this person. I've seen this before. We got to do this. We got to do that. We want to get on it to hopefully keep our human healthy. So that's actually that's my favorite part of this whole thing. I don't know why. The body's just amazing. So that is basically where our memory cells come from, are our helper T cells. So we have 2 types of mechanisms of immunity: cell mediated and humoral immunity. Cell mediated involves the T cells. Humoral immunity is mainly B cells with a little bit of help from the T cells. When we have cell mediated immunity, the most important part of this that I really want you to get is think cytotoxic, because that we will talk about, it will come back. That's basically a type of cell that will get rid of the antigen or the pathogen. I guess that's good enough to know, because you don't really need to know. I mean, you're not going to document cytotoxic cell. It's just more memorization. And if you want that, I think that's fine. I just don't find it useful in the actual nursing world. What I find more useful is going to be understanding how the immune system works, how awesome it is. And all the stuff that we're talking about right now comes down to passive and, acquired and all of that. And that is nursing stuff. That is stuff that you will use. So that's why having the background information that we're talking about from yesterday's video, today's video, our original video, that's kind of why we're doing this, just as a side note. Okay, so we have the cell mediated. It's great. We have our T helper cells, which our T cells help to basically create memory cells. And now those memory cells will be able to help us recognize if we ever come into contact with that pathogen again. Example, I have the flu. I I sneeze. In the video, I think I sneezed on, well, I know I gave Pedro the chicken pox, so I guess we'll just use him again. So let's say I sneeze on him and it's a specific type of flu. He gets it, his body reacts to it, he's building the memory cells. And let's say it's now the same flu because it was like a couple months later and somebody else at work had it. More than likely, he's not going to get sick because his body has now built antibodies because of the cell-mediated immunity. Your T cells helped create memory cells so that it could recognize it. And now it's able to know, it has like, as I look at like a little key that knows how to go poke it in there and be like, I know you, I know how to kill you and get rid of you because I remember you. So I find that to be helpful to think of it that way. The cold, the human flu. And again, that's why they change the flu virus vaccine usually like every 1 to 2 years, because they pick, I mean, there's many different types of flus, but they choose, and that's why when people say, well, the flu shot's pointless, I'm going to get the flu anyway, you could still get the flu because there's different strains. So they take the most popular strains or strain that's going to be that year and give that as a flu shot, hopefully to avoid the one that is the most popular, if you did not know that, which I think most of you do. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about humoral immunity, which we already have talked about. Humoral has to do with our mainly our B cells, a little bit with our T cells. They do help a little bit. And the humoral immunity, basically, as I mentioned in our lecture, it really gets things going here. It involves the antibody production. And that's extremely important, right? Because we've already said, what do antibodies do? Antibodies get rid of antigens. And how does it do that? Everything we just talked about, all these different types of immunity and helper cells and T cells and memories and all of that. So your humoral immunity is basically, it's creating the antibody production, which is how we live. Basically, if we didn't have this, we probably wouldn't live very long. And it also has to do with, I'm trying to like, this is very hard because I want to keep it superficial with some depth because I want you to remember it because it is important. But keep in mind, B cells don't really move. So they kind of stay in one place, and it's the antibodies that are the ones that are going all around the body and basically finding the antigen and bonding to it. So once it's bonded to the antigen, your antibodies are able then to make that choice at that time, depending on what your antibody is formed to. At that point, since you had that antigen click to it, it's going to cause an immobilization, which means it's not going to allow that pathogen to move. And then at that point, hopefully, depending on what's going on and what your body calls for to kill whatever is the antigen in your body, well then, so it kind of marks it basically. So it's marking it. Your B cell will immobilize, and then it's labeling it for destruction, saying, okay, I am now not going to let you, it almost is like putting handcuffs on it, I guess, if you're thinking about like somebody getting arrested. You're immobilizing it to its best ability to not be able to really move its arm. Let's say you handcuff somebody by the wrist and the feet or ankles. So and then you're labeling it for destruction. And destruction, we'll just say, will be jail. I guess that would be a kind of a way to remember it. And now that the antigen is labeled, certain things will start to happen. So we talked about phagocytosis on Monday during our lecture, and macrophages and neutrophils, and kind of how the whole cascade works, and how and that's really what it is. Everything we just talked about is the cascade, and that's all the background of how things kind of function and happen. And the movies, I think, that I posted explain it really, really well. I'm giving you more of the step-by-step. The movies are going more about like what actually happens, and that's why I'm trying not to repeat it too much. Now the antibodies response, what's going to happen? So basically you have an exposure, and you have this foreign thing come into your body that's not supposed to be there. We already talked about this. It's going to then stimulate the antibody production, right? We've already kind of gone over that. And the antibodies are, they're usually produce, depending on what it is, it could be slow or fast. So the unfortunate part, and this is what I was talking about on Monday, when I said, oh, this is a very fast moving, it was a little bit deceptive, not deceptive on purpose, but the way I said it is like, oh, it works super, super fast, which it does because everything's going fast, but that doesn't mean that it's going to prevent you from getting sick necessarily. So if you read in your book, I think it's like on the 4th or 5th page of the chapter, it does talk about how when you're first exposed to something and the antigens are starting to stimulate, the antibodies are starting to stimulate, that it is a slow process. It is too slow from helping you prevent to maybe get that cold or that flu. However, internally, your body's working very, very fast. So I just wanted to make sure to say that. And then again, when you finally get there, now you are immune to that specific pathogen, which is great because your antibodies were able to create memories. So then we move on to, again, what I just said, the memory cells, which are specific for each pathogen, which makes sense, right? Because your memory is going to have one type of cell that's going to, and there's millions and you have all of these cells that remember all these things. And if you didn't have that, you would be sick all the time. Your body is constantly using energy and constantly working to help you not get sick, which is very, very important. Otherwise, we'd be sick all the time, which again, as we move into chapter 20 with HIV, this is kind of unraveling into something. There's some sort of plan that I'm trying to unravel it into. And then, as I said, if this stuff is not making as much sense right now, it will as we start getting into HIV, and then me drawing the diagram before we take the test. And I think then things will really start to click and the videos and whatnot. And I'm probably going to say that, I've said it now, I think 4 times. I'll probably say it again. There is a reason why I'm doing it this way. Okay. Then, and we'll talk about vaccines and all of that a little bit more when we talk about the types of immunity. But I did post a video on the discussion board about different types of immunity. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that because I don't want these videos to be so long that you don't listen to them. And I know I tend to kind of say a lot of filler words that make them even longer. I'm completely aware of that. Okay, so then we already talked about, on the second exposure, then hopefully your body has created enough antibodies in order to have the response to be able to protect you and prevent a second time of you getting any sort of illness or, disease or virus or whatnot, which is very good. And that has to do with vaccinations. Again, we'll talk about in just a moment. And I guess the main thing, let's just say now, the main thing about vaccination and why we do vaccination is because we're putting either if I'm giving you an injection of something, your baby or whatever vaccine it is, I am giving you an injection of either a inactivated, I call it dead, same thing, inactivated or dead. It's another thing about this whole immunity thing. There's so many different words you can use, and I don't want to confuse people, especially because it's confusing as it is. Many of us speak more than one language, including myself. Not fluent, but still, and it can become confusing, right? Like when I'm talking in my other language and I'm like, wait a minute, they just used a word, and it can, I'm trying to use consistent words as much as possible, so that I don't make something that's already confusing more confusing, as just to let you know. So we're getting our vaccines, and I'm just giving you the facts of what is in the book. And that, I know that some people don't believe in vaccines, so I'm not trying to offend anybody, but the vaccination is doing what? I'm putting either a dead, if you will, or inactivated disease, if you will, into someone's body, or a very small amount of like the protein of the disease, or into the body, not enough to activate it to make them actually get it, but just enough to stimulate antibodies. So one of those 3 things is happening. Either it's inactivated, it's a very, 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 very small amount. Well, those 2 things are happening. And then your body does what? It's exactly what we said before. Your B cells, oh, there's something here, they're stationary. What goes out? The antibodies go out. And what happens? You start seeing it, finding out what cell needs to attack it, what what type of antibody needs to attack it, what's going to be most effective. If it's a fungus, a virus, a bacteria, what's going on. It's going to do what it needs to do. And then it's going to make the memory cells, right? And how do we make our memory cells? By our, hopefully someone's answering this as we're going along, but you're going to create your memory cells. And once you create your memory cells, then the next time you come into contact, that's why you don't get it. And so that's why we, you know, when we get our MMR vaccine or all those vaccines when we're little, why we get titers done. So all of us have to get our titers done. And that's why it can be confusing sometimes with tests. We want them to be negative or positive. Well, I want to have a positive titer for an MMR because that's showing that my body is showing the antibodies for MMR. So every year I have to do that where I work, that we don't do the TB test through the sub-Q. They make us actually do the blood draw. I always say it wrong, so I'm just gonna say gold test. So we have to get that test done, and they want a positive. So they're looking for that I have antigens in my body that can fight, or sorry, actually that's not true. That's a bad example. They're looking for a negative. I apologize. The other example would be, so that I want negative. So this is why it's confusing, right? I want negative because I don't want to have TB. So it means I don't have TB, I'm good, yay. Now, let's say I got my MMR vaccine or blood drawn and they're drawing a titer. And that's what titers do. So for my titer, I want it to say positive. Yes, I want the titer to be positive for MMR because that means that I have antibodies in my body that I built when I was a little baby and my parents took me to get the MMR vaccine, because now if I came into contact with MMR, I'm not gonna get it because I have the vaccine, which makes me have the antibody. I could have come in contact, God knows how many times, I have no idea, and not even known it. And because my body knew what to do with it because of the memory cells, I didn't get this virus, basically. So I think that's probably actually a really good example. The only other thing I'm going to say, well, other than this, obviously the young and the older population, we know their immune systems are not as equipped, if you will. And number one reason, we know that we have passive immunity for babies that are in the uterus. So mom is giving kind of, you know, here, take some of these to help you because you don't have an immune system. And that's why we're so careful. Wash your hands, do this, do that. And then breastfeeding. And as I said on Monday, we don't shame women who don't breastfeed. We don't do that. But it is good to know how to educate. And that is, I mean, at least for me, if I didn't believe, or if I didn't want to, for whatever reason, that may make me think, wow, if it does potentially help my baby not get sick as often, that would be an incentive, if you will. It's about education. And then, of course, our patients can make their own decisions and we're not there to judge. So that's passive immunity. And passive immunity, remember, as that little baby, it doesn't last. That's short. The acquired and active acquired, like with the immunizations, like what I just talked about with the MMR, that's why I can be right now at my age, a 37, I say it, I'm not afraid to say that, go in, get my blood drawn, and I'm still have my antibodies from that. It's very, very long lasting. So that's the difference between, one difference between passive and immunity, or sorry, passive immunity and active acquired immunity, for example, like with, so passive is short, active is long. I guess kind of think of it like that. And another form of active, it's almost like getting a vaccine. Like I said earlier, if somebody had the chicken pox and I didn't, let's say I never had the chicken pox vaccine, but I got the chicken pox at this age all of a sudden, and usually we get them when we're younger, but let's just say I got them, I'm not going to get them again because what happened? It's just almost the exact same thing as the vaccination, except with the vaccination, you don't actually get it. But when you actually get the chicken pox, you get the chicken pox. It's both active though, because your body's responding to it in the same way, because it's your antibodies saying, hey, let's get it. Let's make memory cells. Now we have memory cells so that the next time we are invaded potentially with this pathogen or antigen, we know how to take care of it. I hope that makes sense. I think that's probably, for me, the best way that I was able to remember it. And I remember it now to this day, all these years later. This is probably my favorite thing because that helps me remember it the most. So whether you're getting the vaccination for it and you don't actually get MMR, you're not going to get sick when you get the vaccination. You might feel a little fluish for one day or so just because your body's working overtime, but you're not gonna get like the flu shot. You don't get the full-blown flu when you get a flu shot. You might feel a little bit tired and lethargic because your body's now, woof, we got to make antibodies, go, 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 go. Unlike if you are given it the actual disease, or just like with the chicken pox or the flu, or let's say I get that flu from someone because I'm in class with them and they sneeze and I now get that flu. My body's doing the exact same thing it would do if I got the shot. The only difference is I actually get the virus. So instead of my body just doing what it needs to do. So that is really all I want to say right now about this part of the immune system. Of course, read the chapters. It's a short chapter, and I will talk more about the different types of B cells and T cells we've really covered. But again, I'm going to go more over it when I have that big poster board before you guys take your test. I think this is a nice roundabout. We had the movies. I'm saying it for the fifth time. The movies. We had our talk on Monday. We have the last video I posted yesterday, the one I posted today, and then I'm going to post one more, probably about 20-minute video about chapter 19. And that basically more having to do with, patients with certain disorders and allergies. So I'm going to stop this here and post it. And I hope this is starting to kind of blossom and become a little bit more clear. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I hope you all have a fabulous day.